Hey guys, you, welcome back to my channel. I'm going to read you a couple of children's stories. This one is called Jack and the Beanstalk. Once upon a time, there lived a poor widow and her only son, Jack. One morning, Jack's mother told him to take their cow to market and sell her, for they had no money left. On the way, Jack met a curious old man who offered him 5 magic beans in exchange for the cow. The man swore they would bring Jack great fortune. Trusting the promise, Jack handed over the cow and ran home with his prize. But when Jack's mother saw the beans, she was furious. "You foolish boy," she cried. "You've traded our only cow for a handful of nonsense." In a fit of anger, she tossed the beans out the window. Jack went to bed heartbroken and hungry. When dawn broke, Jack looked out the window and gasped. Overnight, the beans had spreaded into a towering beanstalk that reached all the way to the clouds. Trembling with wonder, he began to climb higher and higher until he reached a strange kingdom in the sky. In a massive stone house, Jack met the wife of a fearsome giant. "Please," Jack begged, "may I have a little food? I've climbed so far and I'm starving." The kind woman gave him bread and milk, but just then, the ground began to quake. The giant was coming home. Jack darted behind the stove as the monstrous voice bellowed through the hall. "Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread." "Don't be silly," said his wife. "There's no boy here." The giant grumbled, but sat down to eat. After his meal, he opened a sack bursting with gold coins, counted them carefully, and fell asleep. Seizing his chance, Jack crept out, stole a sack of gold, and scrambled down the beanstalk. His mother wept with joy. They could live well for a time. Yet greed and curiosity soon returned. Jack climbed the beanstalk again, back to the giant's house once more. The giant's wife pitied him and gave him food, but before Jack could finish, the thunderous footsteps shook the floor again. The giant burst in, roaring, "Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread." Again his wife soothed him, and he ate until he was full. Then he brought out a hen and barked, "Lay!" To Jack's amazement, the hen laid a golden egg. When the giant fell asleep, Jack snatched the hen and hurried down the beanstalk. His mother was delighted, but warned him never to climb again. Days later, Jack's daring nature got the better of him. He climbed once more to the castle in the clouds. The giant's wife, though wary, gave him food again, but before long, the giant stomped through the door, growling, "Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread." "Don't be ridiculous," said his wife, though his eyes flickered toward Jack's hiding place. That night, while the giant snored, Jack crept into his chamber and saw a golden harp that played music by itself. He reached out, but the harp suddenly cried, "Help, master, a boy is stealing me." The giant awoke with a roar and gave chase. Jack fled down the beanstalk, the harp clutched in his arms. As Jack's boots hit the ground, he shouted to his mother, "Bring me the axe." He seized it and swung with all his might, chopping at the beanstalk. Wood splintered and vines tore until the enormous stalk cracked in two. With a final thunderous crash, the giant plunged from the sky, dead where he fell. From that day on, Jack and his mother lived in comfort and peace, their hearts full of gratitude and awe for the strange adventure that had changed their lives forever. The next story is The Tale of Peter Rabbit. Once upon a time, there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. "Now, my dear," dears," said old Mrs. Rabbit one morning. "You may go into the fields or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there. He was put on in a pie by Mrs. McGregor. Now run along and don't get into mischief. I am going out." Then old Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella to the baker's. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, went down the lane to gather blackberries. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. First he ate some lettuces and some French beans, and then he ate some radishes, and then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. But round the end of a cucumber frame, whom should he meet but Mr. McGregor? Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees, planting out young cabbages, but he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling out, "Stop, thief!" Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten the way back to the gate. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages, and the other shoe amongst the potatoes. After losing them, he ran on 4 legs and went faster, so that I think he might have got away altogether, if he had not unfortunately ran into a gooseberry net and got caught by the large buttons on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, quite new. Peter gave himself up for lost and shed big tears, but his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows, who flew to him in great excitement and implored him to exert himself. Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve which he intended to pop upon the top of Peter, but Peter wriggled out just in time, leaving his jacket behind him, and rushed to the tool shed and jumped into a can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in, if it had not been so much water in it. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden underneath a flower pot. He began to turn them over carefully, looking under each. Presently, Peter sneezed. "Kerchoo!" Mr. McGregor was after him in no time, and tried to put his foot upon Peter, who jumped out of a window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter. He went back to work. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and trembling with fright, and he had not the least idea which way to go. Also, he was very damp with sitting in that can. After a time, he began to wander about, going lippity-lippity, not very fast, and looking all around. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and out over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the wood. Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth that she could not answer. She only shook her head at him. Peter began to cry. Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Presently he came to a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his water cans. A white cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very still, but now and then the tip of her tail twitched as if it were alive. Peter thought it best to go away without speaking to her. He had heard about cats from his cousins, little Benjamin Bunny. He went back towards the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the noise of a hoe. Scratch, 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 scratch. Peter scurried underneath the bushes, but presently, as nothing happened, he came out and climbed up a wheelbarrow and peeped over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned towards Peter, and beyond him was the gate. Peter got down very quietly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could go along a straight walk behind some black currant bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter did not care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe, at least in the wood outside in the garden. Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and the shoes for a scarecrow to frighten the blackbirds. Peter never stopped running or looked behind him till he got home to the big fir tree. He was so tired that he flopped down upon the nice soft sand on the floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking. She wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. I am sorry to say that Peter was not very well during the evening. His mother put him to bed and made some chamomile tea, and she gave a dose of it to Peter, 1 tablespoon to be taken at bedtime. But Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail had bread and milk and blackberries for supper. And the last story I'm going to read is one that I don't think I've ever heard of before. The Elves and the Shoemaker. A shoemaker, through no fault of his own, had become so poor that he had nothing left but enough leather for one last pair of shoes. That evening he cut the leather into pieces, ready to sew the shoes the next morning. Then, with a clear conscience, he went quietly to bed and fell asleep. In the morning, when he sat down at his workbench, there stood the 2 shoes, already finished. He was amazed. He picked them up to look more closely, and they were perfectly made. Every stitch was neat, and even as if a master craftsman had sewn them. Soon a customer came in, and the shoes pleased him so much that he paid more than the usual price. With that money, the shoemaker was able to buy leather for 2 pairs of shoes. He cut them out that evening, and the next morning, there they were going again, already made. Customers came gladly and paid him well, so he bought leather for 4 pairs. The next morning, those 4 pairs were finished too, and so it went on. Whatever he cut out in the evening was finished by morning. Before long, he was doing well again, and in time he became quite wealthy. Now, one evening, not long before Christmas, after the shoemaker had finished cutting his leather, he said to his wife, "What do you say we stay up tonight and find out who's been helping us?" His wife thought it was a fine idea. She lit a candle, and they hid themselves behind some clothes hanging in the corner of the room and watched. At midnight, 2 tiny little men appeared. They sat right down at the shoemaker's table, picked up the cut leather, and began to stitch and sew and hammer with their small fingers, working so skillfully and so quickly that the shoemaker could hardly believe his eyes. They didn't stop until every pair was done and standing neatly on the table. Then they ran away as fast as they had come. The next morning, the wife said, "Those little men may have made us rich, and we really should show them more that we're grateful. They run around with nothing to wear. They must be freezing. I'll tell you, I'll make them little shirts, coats, vests, and trousers, and knit them each a pair of stockings, and you can make them little 2 pairs of shoes." The shoemaker gladly agreed. When everything was ready, they laid the tiny clothes out on the table instead of cut leather, then hid to see what the little men would do. At midnight, the 2 came bounding in, ready to work, but instead of the leather, they found the little outfits. At first they were surprised, but then they were overjoyed. They dressed themselves as fast as they could, smoothing down the pretty clothes and singing, "Now we are boys so fine to see, why should we longer cobblers be?" Then they danced and skipped and leaped over chairs and benches and finally danced right out the door. They never came back again, but as long as the shoemaker lived, everything went well for him and his work prospered. Second story. There was once a poor servant girl who was hardworking and tidy. She swept the house every day and emptied her dustpan on the big heap outside the front door. One morning, just as she was heading back to work, she found a letter lying on the heap. Since she couldn't read, she brought it to her master and mistress. It turned out to be an invitation from the Elves, asking the girl to be godmother at a christening. The girl didn't know what to do, but after much persuading and being told it wasn't right to refuse such an invitation, she agreed to go. 3 Elves came to fetch her and led her to a hollow mountain where the little folk lived. Everything inside was tiny, but more beautiful and elegant than words can describe. The baby's mother lay in a bed of black ebony decorated with pearls. The blankets were embroidered with gold. The cradle was made of ivory, and the bath was solid gold. The girl served as godmother, and then she wanted to go home, But the little elves begged her to stay 3 days with them, so she stayed and had a wonderful time. The little folk did everything they could to make her happy. When she was finally ready to leave, they filled her pockets with gold coins and let her out of the mountain. When she got home, she picked up her room, still standing in the corner where she'd left it, and started weeping. But some strangers came out of the house and asked who she was and what she was doing there. As it turned out, she hadn't been away for 3 days as she thought, but for 7 years. In that time, her old master and mistress had both died. Third story. A mother's baby had been stolen from its cradle by the elves. In its place, they had left a changeling, a strange creature with a large head and staring eyes that did nothing but eat and drink. The poor woman went to her neighbors for advice. The neighbor told her to carry the changeling into the kitchen, set it on the hearth, light a fire, and boil water and 2 eggshells. That will make the changeling laugh, she said, and if he laughs, it will all be over. The woman did exactly as her neighbor told her. When she put the eggshells filled with water on the fire, the strange creature said, I am as old as the western woods, but never in my life have I seen anyone boil water in an eggshell. And he burst out laughing. The moment he laughed, a crowd of little elves appeared. They brought the real child, set it down on the hearth, and carried the changeling away with them. Okay, well, that's it for me today, guys. I hope you enjoyed these stories. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye.